Hello, this is Greg Gauss from Green Greg's coming to you on the 25th of August, 21. Time on deck is 2800 hours Central Daylight Time, and I'll be airing this tomorrow sometime Thursday at midday. Now, tonight I'm coming to you, or today, with John, who's a military veteran of Iraq and quite a historian. He's got a lot of background in history and a lot of experience, practical hands-on. He's been there, ladies and gentlemen. He knows what it's like on the ground. He's got a lot of experience and a lot of contacts in these areas, and currently works a lot of this stuff too. I won't go into detail on that because we'll stay a little bit private on it. But guys, I bring you this as part of my eyes wide open and head on a swivel series so that you will know to be ready, because there's a proposition this channel will help you survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive. It means, you know, the control, you know what I mean. And as you know, I bring you a lot of videos about things that you need to know to help you do that, such as gardening, worm farming, eating free from the weeds and the trees, which is very important if you want to survive. But you also got to know how to do other tasks, like I said, gardening, bushcraft. And you better store some things up, because that stuff, until you get a whole lot under your belt, just may not cover you. And right now, I've got a great special for you. It is $300 off a 3-month supply of food that lasts 25 years. And it's lightweight, easy to store, easy to carry, because it is freeze dried, which is the best way to store food. And you go to prepwithgreg.com and you'll find this stuff. You get 2,000 calories per day for these meals. A lot of your food storage companies, they shortchange and give you 800 calories a day, and you can't even survive off that, my friends. This is real stuff, and it's real meals. It's good for you. And you get 6 of these buckets if you get the 3-month deal. If you can't afford that, then do the 1-month deal. And you still get 25% off, which is quite a savings. And 1 month is 2 of these buckets. Each bucket is 2 weeks. So guys, it's easy to store, easy to carry. Your kids can carry these. Your kids can carry them. You can bug out with them, store them in your house, whatever you need, because with everything going on, you need to consider prepping supplies. Now, that is the largest supplier. This comes from the largest supplier of long-term food, and that is My Patriot Supply. So if you go to prepwithgreg.com and click on the logo above, it takes you into the website and all these other aspects. You can find gluten-free, vegan, meat eaters, whatever you're looking for, it's there. And many other prepping supplies also. So check that out. So let's get on with our topic here now. Oh yeah, subscribe to my channel, bang the notification bell, and click all, so you can continue to receive videos from my channel and notifications on these many topics I cover. And I just did an interview with General Ken Chrosniak, and I'll do another with him tomorrow night, which will be recorded and aired later. So I bring you a lot of stuff. We also have little community chat sessions on this channel. So John, you have served our country. You've been a distinguished veteran, but you're also a historian. So you bring the background of understanding where all this came from, and you can understand and see what we're doing today and where it's going. So how did all this get started, John? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then give us a little perspective on the Mideast.
Okay. My name is John. I'm a veteran of the U.S. military. I served my country in Iraq 3 times during OIF-1 back in 2003, Operation New Dawn in 2011. So that's the beginning and the end, you know, the beginning, the invasion portion, and then the end when we pulled out. And then I also served in 2014 in Operation Inherent Resolve against ISIS. And so I got to see it in Mesopotamia, which from a historical perspective, that is the land between the rivers in Iraq. That is the cradle of civilization. That's the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Those 2 rivers pretty much are sourced in Turkey and in northern Iraq and the Caucasus, and then they flow down. The region between the 2 rivers is it's known as the Fertile Crescent. If you go back to the Bible, going back to Genesis, Abraham, that time, that's where they evolved from, the cradle of civilization. The Assyrian Empire, which led to the Babylonian Empire, the time of Esther. There was a large number of Jews. It's mentioned in the book of Esther when they had the Jewish diaspora that went to Babylon, and then they returned before the time of Christ. Believe it or not, up until recent times, you still had a lot of Jewish people there in Iraq. You also have a lot of Christians in Iraq, especially in northern Iraq, but in and around Baghdad. Babylon is just southeast of Baghdad, and that's mentioned in the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar King Xerxes that fought against at Thermopylae against the Greeks. All that originates from there. So I got to visit the cradle of civilization, where it's the cradle. It's where handwriting began, paper began. Everything you need for civilization pretty much started there. Human farming started there, everything. And again, it's mentioned in the Bible, and it is still relevant today, as we have seen the past, going back to the when Israel became a nation in 1948. Iraq was one of the countries in the Arab coalition that attacked Israel the day after the day it was that they declared a country in 1948. So a lot of our religions, whether it's Judaism, whether it is Christianity, and even up to Islam, those are the three key monotheistic religions today in the world. All three of them have their roots there, with Abraham there comes out of Mesopotamia.
Yeah,
and one little phrase I'd like to mention, one thing I want to mention as a historian and everything, the more we ignore history, the more we are doomed to repeat it. And that is so true. That is so true.
And we're pretty bad about that. So
yes, and I blame a lot of that chiefly on our schools. I challenge everyone listening that listens to this. I when I retired from the military, went to go teach high school. That lasted a year and a half at a public school and a year at a private school, and it was not very, very pleasant what's going on in our schools today. They're not teaching history. They're not doing it.
So were your hands tied?
Yes, very much so. I was hired to do one thing, and then when I got into it, they wanted me to do other things. So there you go. It's and plus there's no discipline in our schools. The teachers have they have no support. The ones that's really into it, that really want to teach and everything like that, they're typically run off.
I believe it. So how did the Mideast get into the knot that it's in today, and how's that lead us up to where we're at with Afghanistan? Okay,
I'm gonna begin. Let's go back to the Ottoman Empire. The Roman Empire fell. It dissolved. Going back, you had the Roman Republic, and then afterward you had the time of Julius Caesar. Rome was becoming rotten. You had the Roman Senate during the Republic. It became corrupt. In the days, yes, very much. In the days of the time of the Roman legions in Gaul, which would be, Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, the Ides of March. Prior to that, Rome was conquering Europe. You also had the legions were all based in Europe, in Gaul, which is modern day France. Britannia is the Latin word, is the Latin word for Britain, Great Britain, United Kingdom. But the Roman legions were not allowed to go south of the Rubicon River, which is a river, really pretty much a creek today in north of Rome. They were not allowed to come south. If they did, then they were subject to execution. They've committed treason, therefore they would be found and executed. And Julius Caesar, you've probably seen the movie Rome that came out around 2007, 2008 on HBO. You actually have a scene where Julius Caesar talks to his 13th Legion, that was his favorite legion, and told him what was going on, and we got to do something. So he decided, I'm going to cross the Rubicon, and he went. He was greeted as a hero in Rome. The Senate was afraid of him, and they pretty much let him in. The people wanted him there. He came in, and then we had the Ides of March, 44 BC. He was assassinated, and then but while Julius Caesar's there, he was pretty much made a dictator of Rome. A dictator being they made him in charge. You still had the Roman Senate, but he was in charge. He was not a king or anything. He was kind of a protector of Rome. Then he was assassinated, and then the next thing that occurred, his nephew Augustus became the first Caesar, and the word Caesar means king or emperor, and they took that from Julius Caesar's last name. And then you had the Roman emperors. Some were good, some were bad. The bottom line is Rome began to rot, and it pretty much dissolved. You had the sack of Rome several times by the I'm trying to remember here, by some of the Germanic tribes. By the time the Roman Empire was considered dissolved and split into East and West, Eastern Roman Empire was the Byzantine Empire with its capital in Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire with its headquarters in Rome. That's where the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, was headquartered at. They also had, under the time of Charlemagne, I'm going to jump forward a little bit, the first Holy Roman Emperor was Charlemagne. He was crowned Christmas Day in 800 AD in Cologne, Germany. He was Germanic. But going back, the Roman Empire split into East and West. And that's why you have the Orthodox Church, or the Greek Orthodox Church. And that's why you have the Catholic Church. That's where Christianity split into two sects, Eastern and West. Fast forward, in Saudi Arabia, modern day Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia means Saud, the house of Saud, and that's the ruling family, the house of Saud. That's why you have Saudi Arabia in the kingdom of Arabia. You had Muhammad, the first Islamic, the prophet who started Islam. As you know, Christianity begins with Genesis, the Old Testament, and it ends with Revelation. Whereas in the Jewish Bible, which is the Old Testament, pretty much it's the same thing. But going back to Muhammad, he founded Islam. He said there's no God but Allah, and Allah is and Muhammad is his prophet. When he passed away, they conquered the greater Middle East all the way to Spain, North Africa. You had a lot of Arabic traders. They went through Central Asia, which just includes modern day Afghanistan, modern day Iran. And I want you to hold that thought. And they went as far as modern day Indonesia, which was to be the Dutch colony of the Dutch East Indies. They were granted their independence in 1948 after World War II. We'll get to that later. But Indonesia is the largest Islamic country in the world today by population. It is not, notice it's in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is an archipelago. And it became that from the Arab traders, the seafaring traders. They would trade in there. We'll get to that. We'll talk more about Indonesia later. But anyways, so you had the rise of Islam. That's also during the Middle Ages. And you had the time of the Crusades. One of the things in the Middle East today, you hear from ISIS, you hear from Al Qaeda, especially Osama bin Laden. Remember he would give the video interviews after 9/11 and admitted that yes, we did it. He called the West, the United States and Europe, crusaders. That comes from the Crusades. The ISIS, they called, excuse me a second.
When you're ready, there's a pot pie warm for you downstairs.
Okay. When ISIS was taking over northern Iraq, starting in 2013, 2014, 2015 timeframe, they called the Christians the Nuns. Nun is the Arabic equivalent to the Latin letter N. Nun means Nazarene. Where is Jesus Christ from? Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth. So that's why in the Middle East, Christians are known as nuns or they're known as crusaders. Because in the Middle East, in the Arabic speaking world, your last name, let's use Saddam Hussein, for example. His full name or his partial full name is Saddam Hussein al-Takriti, because Saddam Hussein is from Tikrit. So that where you're located is part of your name. All right. So moving on, the Ottoman Empire pretty much replaced a lot of the Arab Empire that was going on, the Arabic folks during the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, you had a lot of wars in Europe. The Catholic religion was the Christian religion in Western Europe. In Eastern Europe, it was Catholicism. That includes Russia, Romania, Hungary, all those Eastern European countries, down into the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire swept up through the Balkan region, which is modern day former Yugoslavia, Albania, all the way down through Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, keep Bosnia-Herzegovina in mind, and then in through Greece, Macedonia, into Turkey. The Ottoman Empire, eventually they conquered all of the Arab region. Not North Africa was not, but it went all the way up into southeastern Europe, and you had a lot of battles between a lot of the European nobles and whatnot in Europe. We're going back to, I believe it was AD 712. You have Charles Martel. He was a Frankish king, and he stopped the Arab conquest coming up into Europe in Tours. I think it was Tours. I can't remember, but Charles Martel, he was known as the Hammer, and he stopped the European drive into Western Europe. He's credited that. Charlemagne, all the knights in Europe, their main fights other than beside themselves was against the Arab invaders. Vlad the Impaler, he's Count Dracula. He's out of Transylvania, which is modern day Romania. He was one of those, and he was the count that ruled that area circa 1453. Okay, all right. Constantinople was sacked circa 1453, I believe, and that's in Constantinople is now modern day Istanbul, located in Turkey. When that happened, that was the end of the Byzantine Empire, and that was pretty much the last vestiges of the Roman Empire in the East. In the West, the Holy Roman Empire, it pretty much dissolved. Believe it or not, the last Holy Roman Emperor pretty much ended at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. I might be mistaken, but I believe that's where it was. A lot of your German kings were considered holy. That's where most of them came from. You had the Age of Discovery and the Renaissance, which began in the 1400s in Italy. It spread throughout Europe, and then you also had at the same time the Age of Discovery, Christopher Columbus. You all know that story, and here we have America today. But with all the wars that were going on through the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, you had the War of the Spanish Succession, just Queen Anne's War. Then you had the wars between France and Great Britain. You had wars between Prussia and Sweden in Northern Europe. That's why people came to America, to escape that stuff. Plus, Martin Luther in the late 1500s, he did his theses at the church in Wittenberg, and that's what began the Protestant Reformation. Because back then you couldn't have science; the church ruled everything. They said the world was flat. The Earth is the center of the universe. You had Christopher Columbus, you had Galileo. They were scientists. The Renaissance, the rebirth. What's interesting is a lot of the Arabs, they had conquered North Africa and also southern Spain. They were kicked out of Spain after 1492 by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. One of the interesting things in the Renaissance, it means rebirth. It was a rebirth in art and a rebirth in science. A lot of the scientific knowledge that we have from the Greeks can be attributed to the Arabs, especially into the large library that was located in Alexandria, Egypt. The word algebra, math that we use today, which leads into calculus and trigonometry and whatnot, that was all those discoveries came in during antiquity, and the Arabs preserved a lot of that. And the Catholic Church thought it was heresy and tried to keep that stuff down. But then you had the Renaissance, the rebirth, the rise of the telescope, all those things, the inventions in medicine and science, technology, everything. So there was some good in it. So how did we get to where we're at today? Well, all these wars in Europe, the Middle East was relatively quiet for the most part. We don't know much. Going back to the mid-Middle Ages in 1300 AD, Marco Polo, trade. Everything had to go overland. So you had the Silk Road going from basically Constantinople, from Europe to Constantinople, and it traveled overland through the Levant, which is the area between modern day Israel or Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, modern day Iraq. Back then it was still known as Mesopotamia, Persia, which is modern day Iran, Afghanistan, into China, through modern day Pakistan, which is also a part of Mughal India, Mogul, the Mughal Empire, which you don't hear too much about in school. And then it went on up into China. And what they're after, spices. You couldn't preserve meat back then. You didn't have ice. You had to use spices. You had to have a way to preserve it. And the Chinese, they invented paper and all those other and several other inventions. The Chinese were very advanced, and that was part of the Qin dynasty. That's where China gets its name from. And that was 2500 BC. So people wonder, why does China look on the world differently than everybody else? Why does China doesn't think too much of the United States? The United States has been around for 245 years, since 1776, whereas the Chinese, they trace their lineage back to the Qin dynasty. That's where the word China gets its name from. That's why they look down on the West. They think they're superior. So anyways, Marco Polo, they opened up the trade routes, and then they wanted to get it by water because it takes too long to travel. You know, Marco Polo took 2 years to get from Europe to China. He was in China for several decades, and then he came back. So, and then he went before and gave his reports and whatnot. So I know I've jumped around a little bit, but the Silk Road went through Afghanistan. You probably remember in geography, you know where the Himalaya mountains are. That separates China, which is southern China, is the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which China took by 1948, the end of the 1950s, and it's known as the roof of the world. There's parts of the Himalayan plateau that in Tibet, there's 15,000 feet elevation. It's flat. People live there. You know, Mount Everest is nearly 30,000 feet high. Most of your 8,000ers, which is 8,000 meters, those mountains are located in the Himalaya. So you have to have a pass. That pass is known as the Khyber Pass. That's where the Silk Road went through. One of the contracting airlines that's been out and does cargo in and out of Afghanistan is known as Silk Road. So Afghanistan has been a crossroads of east and west going back to antiquity. Alexander the Great, his army stopped pretty much in this river. They went through Afghanistan, but they've been away from home. The tribes located there are very nomadic, and they fought them. The British were located, they went to Afghanistan in the 1800s during the height of their empire, and they didn't stay long. We all know about the Russians from 1979 to 1989. And now we have the situation we have today since 9/11. But the regions of the Middle East, and especially Afghanistan and Central Asia, is known as the crossroads. It's the Silk Road. It's where all the trade routes went through. It's never been fully conquered. It is tribal in nature. And let me mention what the word tribe means. It's family ties. It's family. People remember things that go back generations. Your great grandfather times 10 stole the goat of my great grandfather times 10. So I don't like you. Or the friend of my enemy is my enemy. Or since you're an enemy of my enemy, you're now my friend. You have those sayings. So it's very tribal and family oriented there. Why is the Middle East in such turmoil today, besides the Islamic schisms? You know, back when Muhammad died, he did not have a known successor. So you had a split, which is why today you have the Shia, which is located primarily in Persia, which is Iran, and eastern Iraq, up to Baghdad. And then you have Sunni Muslim, which is the rest. To break it down in percentages, roughly 80% of the Muslims are Sunni, to include Saudi Arabia, based in Mecca. And then the other 20% are Shia. So you can see why there's such discourse and conflict in the Middle East. It's almost the same as, you know, the Jews and the Arabs over there, the Jews and the Islamic faith. They don't like each other. Jews, you know, you do have the Arabs that live in Israel, Israeli Arabs and Israeli Muslims. They're okay. They're civilized for the most part, but you have so much schism going on in the Middle East. It goes back generations. In the modern era, in the 1700s,
There was a time that Jews thought they lived more successfully in Arab countries. They like
yes,
like what the
there
Moors
at one
ruled Spain.
time,
The Jews were happy there. They were not comfortable in Europe.
right? The European powers did not like Jews. I mean, everybody talks about Adolf Hitler, and we know that he was anti-Semitic. A lot of European countries throughout millennia have anti-Semitic views, and that is because the Jews, the Sanhedrin, when Jesus Christ was crucified, they're the ones that asked Pontius Pilate to put him to death. So that's why the Catholic Church had a lot of anti-Semitism going on, and that's because of the Bible. You look in the Bible, so you have that. Only up to recently, and I think post World War II, do you have that differently. We can get to that here in a second, but in the 1700s, by 1492, Spain had kicked out the Jews, or they kicked the Moors out of Spain. That's northern Arabs that were Muslim. They had also worked to expel the Jews as well. During the 17 and 1800s, you had all the conflicts in Europe. Everything from, I further mentioned the War of the Spanish Succession of 1701. King Charles II of Spain passed away at age 39 because if you looked at his family tree, it is straight as an arrow. You had the Habsburg dynasty in Europe. They did not want to marry outside the commoners and people like that. They wanted to keep the power within. And so that's your Habsburg dynasty. King Charles II was the last ruler of Spain, Habsburg Emperor of Spain. He died. He had the Habsburg jaw. If you look at Jay Leno, he has it. He had a severe underbite. He was impotent. He was married twice, outlived his first wife, his second wife. If he was married twice, he did not outlive his second wife, but he had no children. That led to wars because they did not want the kingdom of Spain to unite with the kingdom of France, because the French kings were also part of the Habsburgs, and you had the Germans and the Austrians and everything else, the Germanic states. So all this leads up to American Revolution. Then France helped us. As you know, Lafayette and Ben Franklin helped the United States and France work together, John Adams. And this led to basically the French Revolution, because France was bankrupt. France wanted revenge on Great Britain for the French and Indian War, which is the 7 Years' War in North America. In Europe, it was a 7 Years' War. See how they call the 7 Years' War the First World War. You had the Germanics, the Prussians, and everything. Prior to that, you had Frederick II, I believe, Frederick Barbarossa, who, by the way, was looked upon by the Nazi regime as one of their big historical figureheads to look at. You had them, you had the French, you had the Spanish. Everybody was involved, and it was worldwide. You had wars. You had the French and British East India companies. You also had the British West India Company. That's in the Caribbean. So you had all this going on worldwide, everywhere, from North America, Atlantic, Pacific, Asia, Africa, even Europe. It was a lot of things going on, and it all led to Napoleon. He was a French artillery officer. He rose up through the ranks, and he's not French. He's Corsican, from the island of Corsica. He spoke French with an Italian accent, and he was a genius. The modern U.S. military, the staff, uses the Napoleonic staff principles. S1, S2, or G1, G2, G3, S3, S4, all like those. He organized the staff. He was also obviously he was a gifted artilleryman, gifted strategist. He came to power by 1799, conquered Egypt, had his scientists and historians, whatnot, and his archaeologists. They came down to Egypt. They made a lot of Egyptology discoveries that you can see today in the Louvre Museum in France. The Rosetta Stone was allowed the Egyptian hieroglyphics to be converted or translated, because you had hieroglyphics, and I believe you had Greek and some other languages there. And so we finally cracked the code of Egyptology, which led to a lot of discoveries. that we're still discovering today. But Napoleon opened up Europe more to what was going on in the Middle East through his conquering in Egypt, as well as colonies and whatnot. And as we all know, by 1814, Napoleon was defeated, and he was sent to his first exile. When that happened, you had something called the Congress of Vienna. It started in 1814. These were all the European powers that had defeated Napoleon. We're going to carve up Europe now. We're going to make countries. We're going to draw the borders of Europe. In 1815, Napoleon had his 100 days and had his Waterloo in Belgium, and that pretty much ended it. He died in exile in 1821. The Congress of Vienna ended the period called Europe in ferment. If you know what the word ferment means, it means change. And it's like taking grapes, making them into wine. That's where the word ferment comes from. So I remember one of the chapters I had in college, it was Europe in ferment. And it's always fascinated me because I see very similar things happening today. What happened after the Congress of Vienna up through World War I, you had a relative peace in Europe for the most part. Yeah, you had the Italy became it was full of the papal states. It became a country under Garibaldi. Then you also had Germany united. Otto von Bismarck came to power in the 1850s, 1860s. He fought Austria. He was the prime minister of Prussia, which is modern day Poland and Eastern Germany and Northern Germany. Again, Poland disappeared after the Congress of Vienna of 1815. It was a country prior to that because they sided with Napoleon. They lost out. But by 1871, Kaiser Frederick or Kaiser William I was crowned the Kaiser in the Palace of Versailles in 1871 in Paris after the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. The last French emperor was Napoleon III. He was disposed, and France became the French Republic, the first French Republic. I believe we're now in the fourth French Republic. That's because of World War I, World War II, and Charles de Gaulle. Great Britain was now the king of basically Pax Britannica. Prior to, the other previous time you hear Pax is Pax Romana, the Roman peace. You had relative 300 years during the Roman Empire era. You had peace throughout the world for the most part. The Romans ruled the known seas, which is the Mediterranean. The British now, they have, due to their conquests, due to the treaties, different wars going back to the French and Indian War, / the 7 Years' War, up to the Napoleonic Wars, they now had colonies everywhere. Africa, Asia with India, North America, Canada, Australia, everywhere, South Africa, all that. So it was relatively peaceful. Yeah, but like I said, you had some conflicts that was internal. After the Franco-Prussian War, the French wanted revenge bad on Germany. Germany was a rising industrial power in Germany or in Europe. And you had an arms race. Number one was the Navy. By 1910, you had dreadnoughts, the first modern battleships. You had European observers in the Civil War, especially at the Battle of Gettysburg. You had several observers there from Prussia, which later became Germany, from England, from all over. Queen Victoria this is the Victorian age under Queen Victoria from the 1840s until the time she died in 1901. Britain ruled the world for the most part. It was Pax Britannica. But something happened in Europe, and it's called, you had alliances. You had the Western alliances pretty much.
How long did Pax Britannica last again?
Pax Britannica pretty much lasted from the 1800s, let's just say roughly, I'm going to say 1815, and it ended with World War II.
Okay.
It ended with World War II.
So it lasted over 100 years.
Correct. About 100, 150 years roughly.
So Pax Americana has lasted about 20 years.
Pax Americana has been going on since roughly 1945, the end of World War II, because we now have the largest Navy, the most powerful military. Russia, keep in mind, they don't have a very good Navy. Their big thing was submarines, kind of like the Germans were in World War II and World War I. The American Navy was the aircraft carrier. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that capital ship here in a second. But you had all the alliances, the Western alliances, France and Great Britain, pretty much aligned with the Russian Empire, Tsar Nicholas II. The other interesting thing about Queen Victoria, the Habsburg Empire was going away. Queen Victoria, all the kings and queens of Europe were pretty much related somehow to Queen Victoria. There's famous pictures out there of Kaiser William II wearing a British uniform, and his cousin, I believe it was King George VI, I think, he's got on a German Prussian uniform. He's got on a Prussian uniform. They switched out. They're cousins, first cousins. Tsar Nicholas II was also a first cousin of the Kaiser and of George VI of Great Britain. They're all interrelated, King Victoria. So you see how the Habsburg dynasty, Charles II, he was the last one. His death sparked a war. Queen Victoria, she died in 1901. You had all these arms races going on, and the alliances. And then basically you had let's go to the Balkans, which is former Yugoslavia area, across from Italy. Serbia started, the assassination of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand. Archduke is first in line to take the crown of Austria-Hungary. He was assassinated in 1914. Prior to this, between 1905 and 1914, there were several Balkans wars. Remember what I said, keep in mind Bosnia-Herzegovina. Bosnia-Herzegovina is Muslim. Remember the 1990s when Yugoslavia broke up? Okay. You had a three-way war between the Croats, predominantly Catholic, the Bosnians, predominantly Muslim, and the Serbs, predominantly Eastern Orthodox. Okay. The Russians came to the aid of Serbia. They wanted, or of Serbia, they wanted to, the Austrians got upset at Russia. The Russians supported the Serbs. Here we go. The guns of August.
Serbs and Russians are both Slavic, so they got.
That's correct. They're interrelated. They're related.
They're not adjacent to each other. It's like the Serbs spread out geographically separate, but they're still of the same root.
That is correct. So you had a mix of religions in the Balkans. You had all these alliances. All it took was an assassination that led to World War I. I'm not going to cover into that. It became a stalemate. You had it was a global war. The Japanese were rising after the Mihai dynasty was founded in the 1880s. They modernized. Everybody was modernized. The Japanese wanted conquests as well. They defeated the Russian Empire in 1905 in the Russo-Japanese War. Theodore Roosevelt won the Nobel Peace Prize because of he negotiated the treaty between Japan and Russia in 1905, 1906. So you had the rise of the Industrial Revolution by the 1850s, the London Exposition of 1850. It showed a lot of what was going on, and other countries wanted that. At the same time, Britain, France, Germany, whatnot, they had colonies worldwide in Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, everywhere. So World War I ends with an armistice, the shooting stops, but the treaty that ended the war was the Treaty of Versailles of 1919, and the same place where the Kaiser was crowned in 1871, the first Kaiser of Germany, which, by the way, is known as if you go back, the Germans had a look at you. You've heard the term Third Reich. Reich means basically empire in German. The Second German Reich was considered the period between 1871 and 1918, the time of the Kaisers, the German Empire. The First German Reich would be considered probably the Holy Roman Empire, the Western Europe, under Charlemagne and those kings and whatnot. So that's where that term comes from. That's why it's called the Third Reich, the Nazi period. So what happened to the Treaty of Versailles? The world was carved up. 1916, the British and the French had the Sykes-Picot Agreement. they carved up, they said, hey, when the Ottoman Empire, which is part of the central powers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire, when the Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe, when that empire falls, we want to carve up the Middle East. So after the war, the Treaty of Versailles, you have Transjordan, which was predominantly French. That's why you have a lot of French speakers in Syria and in Lebanon. Britain got Palestine, which is modern day Gaza Strip, the West Bank of Jordan, and also modern day Israel. Egypt is also Britain got to keep Egypt. The Italians kept Libya. Also, you had a large, heavy influence in Iraq, which was Mesopotamia. Then it became the country of Iraq. Persia was independent. Saudi Arabia became its own kingdom. It never was conquered by the West. But you see, the Sykes-Picot Agreement drew those boundaries. You remember what I was talking about tribes?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what those boundaries did? They just drew straight lines. They did
Right.
not follow rivers. They did not follow mountains. Like in the United States, the Mississippi River is nothing but multiple state boundaries. The Rocky Mountains, the Great Smoky Mountains, that's the boundary between the highest points is the boundary between North Carolina and Tennessee.
Right.
So that's typically how you draw your boundaries. Not in the Middle East because it's a flat desert. If you've ever seen the movie Star Wars, you know what I'm talking about. It is that flat and that desolate over there, especially in Western Iraq, known as the Syrian. It's the part of the Syrian desert. By the way, the Tatooine scenes of Star Wars were filmed in Tunisia, North Africa. So what we now have, you have all these tribes that's been separated by artificial boundaries drawn by Europeans. How do you think they felt?
Well, it's caused a lot of animosity, like the Kurds that got divided up.
The Kurds were left at the table. They had no country. They were left out. They wanted a country. And let's go back to modern day Iraq. Modern day Iraq is roughly 60% Shia, 30% Sunni, 10% other, which consists of Kurds, Yazidis, and others up there. Yes, the Kurds want their own country, which would include northern Iraq, parts of eastern Turkey, and parts of western Iran. That is Kurdistan. That is what they want. They have their own military called the Peshmerga. Let me tell you something. Those are some good fighters. They're very good. They're aligned with the West for the most part, but they will go with anybody. They're loyal to themselves, Kurdistan. So you had the Middle East was carved up. It was colonized. France also had Southeast Asia. Great Britain still had India. Pakistan did not exist until 1947, 48. We'll get to that here in a second. But Afghanistan was pretty much left alone. You can't conquer it. Something happened in Russia called the Russian Revolution of 1917 and lasted to about 1920. And that morphed into the Soviet Union. And they conquered countries in Soviet Central Asia, well, known as Soviet Central Asia, like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, countries that most people could not find on a map. They're high steppe lands, mountainous in some parts. Kazakhstan is desert. It's desolate. But Russia itself is a very large country. It stretches over 12 time zones through far Eastern Europe and Northern Asia for the most part. It stretches to the Pacific, to pretty much Vladivostok. North Korea's northern boundary is Russia. But you had all these Middle Eastern countries carved up. You had some turbulence in the 1930s. Germany, the Weimar Republic, it collapsed. You had the stock market crash of 1929, but the German reparations that were hurting it from the Treaty of Versailles, the United States and Great Britain traded with Germany. The Great Britain wanted to get World War I over with because they wanted to start trading again. France wanted revenge, and so France had the big hand because Belgium and France were the two most destroyed areas of Europe during World War II. Germany was unscathed for the most part, except its military was dropped down to 100,000, no airplanes, they couldn't have machine guns, etc. And then you nearly had a revolution in Germany in the 1920s into the 1930s. You had the fights between the communists and the National Socialists. National Socialists are the Nazis. And Adolf Hitler came to power after the elections of 1932, and he became chancellor. He became Führer upon the death of Otto von Hindenburg, who was the president of Germany in 1934. I'm not going to dive into that part. Go through World War II. It was a global war. The British and the Russians pretty much invaded Persia, so that way they could keep the Lend-Lease lines open, so you can supply supplies both from Western Europe, primarily Great Britain, and the United States, so we could ship things to the Russians, keep them going on their war with Germany. In 1941, in Iraq, you had Nazi German influence there, and the British reinvaded Iraq after granting them independence in 1931 in order to keep them from falling in the hands of the Germans. The big German plan that Hitler had, this is a grandiose scheme, but this answered a lot of questions to some of the things that I saw in Baghdad in 2003. Why is there all this? It looks kind of Nazi-ish. It looks kind of like what my great uncle who fought in World War II in the Battle of the Bulge and through Germany. Why are things the way they are? Why was Saddam Hussein so revered in all this? Well, the Ba'ath Party started in the late 1930s. In 1938, Saddam Hussein's uncle and some of the other founders of the Ba'ath Party met the German foreign minister Otto von Ribbentrop in Cairo, Egypt in 1938. They worked a deal with Hitler. The plan was Italy got bogged down in North Africa and Libya with the British. The Germans sent the Africa Corps in. Germany also invaded Russia. The grandiose plan was once General or Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was finished in North Africa, he was going to sweep through the Middle East, link up with von Paulus's Sixth Army through the Caucasus. So he's coming up through the Middle East, up to the Caucasus region, which is Azerbaijan, Georgia, the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia, which by the way is Catholic, and link up into southern Soviet Union, and then march on Moscow. If Hitler had done that, he would have got all the oil fields of Europe, of the Middle East. He was making agreements with the Saudis, with most of the countries of the Middle East, with Turkey. Turkey stayed out of the war. Why? Because Muslims are by nature anti-Semitic. Nazi Germany, anti-Semitic. There you go. You had whole German units. Germany had a lot of foreigners in their army. In addition to Germans, they also had Bosnian units. They wore a fez, just like the Shriners. You see the Shriners. They had the death's head rune on that. I have a friend of mine who has he collects German artifacts and whatnot. He has one of those. And if you look at Mark Felton Productions videos on YouTube on World War II, he actually talks about the Bosnians that were in the German military in World War II. So all of them were anti-communist, and that's why they joined up with them. So it leads to where we at today. After the war, Israel, the Holocaust is founded. 1948, the Middle East attacks, most of Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, whatnot. They attack Israel. Israel wins. The 1948 war, 1956, you had the Suez Crisis with Britain and France and Israel attacking Egypt to keep the Suez Canal open, because Gamal Abdel Nasser, who became the leader of Egypt, he nationalized the Suez Canal. And so the British weren't going to have that. So you had that. And then, of course, 67, the Six-Day War, 67, Israel seizes the West Bank from Jordan, defeats all the pan-Arab armies that they attacked, and also take Jerusalem in one piece. So now it's totally united from east to west. That's why you have the conflict in Jerusalem right now. 1973 Yom Kippur War, Egypt attacked along with Syria, and I think Lebanon and Jordan pretty much reached a stalemate. That was the one of the few times, other than the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the U.S. has been near DEFCON 1, because the Russians were threatening to send paratroopers in to aid their Arab allies. See, after World War II, Egypt was very bitter at Great Britain, and so they pretty much they're starting to side with the Soviets up to 1973. By 1978, you had the treaties at Camp David, the Camp David Accords. You had the first peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, an Arab nation. That kind of sort of isolated Egypt a little bit. So all these things are interconnected. Throughout world history, the Middle East has been a big cauldron of conflict. Moving on, 1979, the Shah is overthrown by the Hezbollah, well, not Hezbollah, by the radical Shias in Persia, which is what we have today. They had terrorist organizations that still exist today, with the Hezbollah as a good example. Afghanistan was invaded in 1979. That prior to the invasion, the Russians were working on establishing a communist government there. Things fell apart, and the Russians invaded Afghanistan to aid their communist allies in Afghanistan.
There's a funny story in Afghanistan. Afghanistan had a period of peace and prosperity in the 60s and 70s.
That is correct. Most of your Arab countries had that. They were becoming westernized, a lot of them.
Yeah.
So now you're a traditional Muslim, especially if you're Shia or if you're Sunni. Sunnis are more modern, Shia are not as modern. So what do you think they're going to think when they start seeing Western ideals come in there? How do you think they feel? They're going to feel threatened. Some of them are educated. They're probably going to look at the United States and European powers and see how they treated the natives. Look at Indonesia. Indonesia was the Dutch East Indies until 1948. The Japanese, during World War II, you had the Greater East Asia Coexistence Sphere. They wanted to kick out part of the Japanese propaganda, or part of their some of the things that they wanted to do. They wanted to kick out the West, the white man. They wanted to kick them out of Asia, out of the Philippines, out of French Indochina, out of Indonesia and Singapore and Malaya. All those were colonies. The Philippines, we inherited that from the Spanish-American War from Spain in 1898. Indonesia was Dutch, going back to the 1600s. Vietnam was French, was a French colony going back 200 years. India was a British colony. At one time, you also had parts of the French East India Company as well. You had all those wars that were fought in the 1700s up to 1815, and you had all these colonies going on, just like in Africa. Africa was totally colonized. After 1945, because the United States is a democracy, we believed in the Declaration of Independence. We had that. The pro independence movement started looking at that. Who was Ho Chi Minh's historical figure that he idolized the most? Do you know who he was? The OSS, which is the predecessor to the CIA, visited Ho Chi Minh and interviewed him.
Let's see. I should know the answer.
He's an American.
General Patton, Robert E. Lee. Oh, come on now. I should know this.
George Washington.
George Washington. He actually studied. All right, there you go. He studied in. He was actually a cook or something in France at one time. He was
he was. Ho Chi Minh was very much educated, but he idolized George Washington. He wanted Vietnam to be a free and independent country. The OSS visited him, and we spurned him because France was an ally of the US during World War II. We had after World War II, we wanted things to go back to status quo. We wanted to pull out. The United States was isolationist up to World War II, up till December 7th.
We spurned him, and that flipped into being communist.
That was he lost support of the West, so he went to the East.
Wow.
Simple as that. It is one of the biggest blunders, foreign policy blunders the United States has ever done. It triggered the first and second Indochina War. Huh?
We've made quite a few. One of them being deposing the president of Iran.
Okay. But all this, the
Dulles
Middle
brothers
East was
made a
becoming
lot of mistakes we're paying for today.
Yes,
We're paying today for a lot of mistakes made by the Dulles brothers, who started out in the OSS and founded the CIA.
that's correct. The 1947, the CIA was founded. The OSS morphed into the CIA. In 1947, you had the National Defense Pact or National Defense Act, which begat the United States Air Force. It was the U.S. Army Air Force. It was separated from the Army, became its own arm. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, was developed and came to pass from that. And also, you had the separation of the who is going to have control or of delivery of atomic weapons. You had the revolt of the admirals. You also had Secretary of Defense Forrestal or Secretary of War Forrestal. It drove him crazy. He committed suicide. He jumped off the naval hospital there in Bethesda, Maryland, off one of the high floors. I mean, it drove him crazy.
Yeah, he was young.
He actually went mad.
He was pretty young when it happened.
Yes. So, but anyway, so now you had just going back forward again. You had all these colonies between 1945 and roughly 1980 that became independent countries. You know, Africa, all of Asia, the partition of India in 1947, 1948, after Gandhi was assassinated. That's how Pakistan came to being. All the Muslims went to Pakistan. Correction, they went to West Pakistan. You also had East Pakistan.
East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, which is Muslim.
That is correct, very much so. And that was birthed by a hurricane or by a cyclone, which is a hurricane in 1970, 1971 timeframe. And the Indian government aided East Pakistan, whereas West Pakistan didn't care, and they revolted. You know, and then of course India and Pakistan has fought several wars over Kashmir and other regions. Plus India and China has fought wars over their boundary in the Himalaya area. In fact, they had a conflict last year. They got into it. They're not allowed to have weapons on either side, so they were using sticks and stones and pioneer tools and rocks.
And they beat each other to
It
death.
happened last year, made the news. But so up through 1980, all these countries were becoming independent. The Middle East was kind of independent, kind of not. They were birthing, but they wanted, Persia became Iran, and then you had, they were pushing Sharia law. They were pushing other things, in Saudi Arabia, they have Sharia law. And people wonder, what is Sharia law? Sharia law means laws of the Quran, is basically what it is. We're going to follow the Quran. And the Jewish people, they follow the Torah. That is their laws, Jewish laws. In Christianity, almost all laws in the West are based off Christianity. It's based off the Bible. It's just morphed over time. I mean, thou shalt not kill. Well, you can't murder anybody. Adultery laws. We up until recently we had those in the West. Most of your laws in the United States is based off the Magna Carta in 1215. That's where it gets its origins from. I've actually saw a copy of it next to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the U.S. You can go up to the Library of Congress and see that. They had Ross Perot's organization had a copy of them, has one of the original Magna Cartas on display. They had it next to the Constitution, but that's where our roots come from. And that's English common law. So most of your Western ideals are either A, based on Napoleonic code from the time of Napoleon, or B, English common law. Whereas the Middle East is Sharia law. Israel, it's off the Torah. So that's where you have a lot of these conflicts. And it's simple. It's borders, language, and culture. That's really what it boils down to. And then the conflicts, during the Cold War, America and the Soviet Union fought proxy wars. Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. What did it do? We aided the Mujahideen. During the Vietnam War, the first and second, Viet Minh versus the French. The Viet Minh kicked out the French, 1954. Vietnam was split in two. So you had North and South Vietnam. The South aided South Vietnam. The North Vietnam was aided primarily by the Russians, also the Chinese. Here's another fact. The Chinese and Vietnamese don't get along. During the Vietnam War era against the U.S., China supported the North. And then you had the Sino-Soviet split by 1972. Nixon went to China, and the rest is history. Detente. Then you had Afghanistan. We got involved with it. Simple as that. so all these Middle Eastern,
Well,
Central
the Vietnamese
Asian,
kicked the Chinese back in 1979, I believe.
the
The Vietnamese kicked the Chinese.
that is correct. Yeah, China invaded northern Vietnam. By this time, Vietnam was united. The Vietnamese, you don't hear about it much. I've heard anywhere from 15 to 25,000 Chinese casualties alone, deaths. I'm not going to cover Korea. Korea at one time was was a colony of Japan, but that was pretty much a part of the proxy wars. Stalin started that when he died of a stroke in 1953. Notice the war ended not soon afterward, real soon afterward. But Mao Zedong and the Soviet Union had a split, Sino-Soviet split. They became more towards the West. And then the Cold War ended with the end of the Soviet Union, starting in 1989 with the Velvet Revolution, the fall of the wall. Another reason why the reason why the Soviets fell was because of Desert Storm. The United States was wrecked after Vietnam. We had to rebuild the military. We had draftees. We ended the draft, started an all-volunteer professional army. Ronald Reagan built it, started building it in 1981.
Yeah, I joined Jimmy Carter's ragbag army. What a mess.
Yep. The NCOs that I had in the beginning of my career, they would ask me, the crusty older NCOs, would go, do you remember Jimmy Carter days? Hollow Army. That's what they would say. They would tell me about it because they joined in the 70s.
Yeah, that was
after
a mess.
Vietnam.
I was in it.
Yeah. So it was different. But think about it. We defeated the United States leading the coalition in 1991. We kept Saddam Hussein from invading Saudi Arabia. That was the big fear. We kicked him out of Kuwait. Of course, this was after the 80 to 88 Iran-Iraq war that Saddam Hussein started. Think about it. All that Russian hardware is just getting laid waste. We had spent a lot of money to build it up to defend Western Europe against the Soviets. The Soviets was watching all their equipment just being blown to bits on the battlefield. And so that had a big chilling effect. In August 1991, they had the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev that was stopped. And by January 1st, 1992, Boris Yeltsin is now the president of Russia. Mikhail Gorbachev is sent to pasture to his dacha, and he's now a statesman today. He actually has an office complex in San Francisco. So he's been a statesman for a long time. But after that happened, well, what does NATO do? What does the United States do? We downsize. You had the downsize in the 1990s. Then in 1992, Yugoslavia fell apart. That's an artificial country. You had so many things. The Christians, the Muslims, and the Christians were split between Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, and then you had it split along ethnic lines as well. But at the same time, in Saudi Arabia, you had a gentleman by the name of Osama bin Laden who had worked in Afghanistan during the 80 through 89 Afghan war with the Soviets. He saw what's going on. He did not want Westerners in Saudi Arabia. He wanted them out because they're on holy ground. Saudi Arabia. That's the epicenter of Islam at Mecca. He did not want that. So he started Al Qaeda, or known as the base. Al Qaeda is Arabic for the base. And we know what happened with that. He had Khobar Towers, 1996, Kenya and Tanzania locations as well that were bombed. USS Cole, August 2000, which was the last run to see what the United States would do. And then we had 9/11. Taliban would not give him up. We invaded Afghanistan. And so here we are 20 years later. 20 years later.
Get out in Pakistan. We didn't want to invade Pakistan because we were somewhat friends with them, and they got nukes, and we didn't want the nukes to get loose.
Right. That is the reason why the United States has been relatively friendly towards Pakistan.
But Pakistan harbored the Taliban. That's where they were hiding out the entire time we were in Afghanistan.
Correct.
They were harbored by the tribes in the semi-autonomous regions in North Pakistan.
Right. And you also know that the northeast corner, you also have a finger in northeast Afghanistan. That finger touches China.
Right.
Western China is Uyghur. They're not Han Chinese. They're not ethnic Chinese or Han, H-A-N. They are predominantly Muslim. They're Central Asian. And they're being neglected and persecuted by the Han Chinese. You know, what the Chinese government has done.
Mildly, what they're doing to them.
That's exactly what the Han Chinese are doing, which is the Chinese government of the communist Chinese. What they're doing, they're actually resettling people out there. That's how they want to solve their problem. They just move people around. You've heard all the tales about Apple and Nike and everything, and all the factories, the slavery and everything like that. But going back to Pakistan, the reason why during the Indo-Pakistan wars of the 50s and 60s through the 70s, the United States pretty much sided with Pakistan. The Soviet Union sided with India. India was pro-Soviet. Winston Churchill did not like Mahatma Gandhi. He did not like him for obvious reasons. You know, hey, I don't want to lose the crown jewel of the British Empire. And so they were looked down upon. But it was split. And this was not done under Churchill. This was done under I'm trying to remember his name, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Churchill was voted out of office in 1945 during the Potsdam Conference. The beginning of the Potsdam Conference, it was Prime Minister Attlee, Atlee. He was a socialist. He was a leftist, where Churchill was a right-wing conservative party in Great Britain. Attlee was Labour Party. That was who was at the Potsdam Conference when the Potsdam Declaration was declared on July 26, 1945. Japan, you better surrender, or else you're gonna see something you've never seen before. The world has never seen before. We know what that was. But anyways, India and Pakistan had developed atomic weapons by the 1970s. In 1998, they did a couple test runs, and in order to keep the peace, you don't want to have a war over there, because you have roughly, India is roughly 1 billion people now. They're catching up rapidly to China's 1.5 billion people. Pakistan has a large number as well. They're told in their Hindu and Islamic religions to be fruitful and multiply, and they take that to heart. So you have a large people. We didn't want to have a nuclear war between India and Pakistan, because we were afraid it would spread to China, Russia, because they all have borders with those areas there. And that's how we sided with that. So that's why we're embroiled with Pakistan. It's a tit for tat thing with Pakistan. And yes, it's not lost. Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan.
Well, we actually favored Pakistan over India for a long time.
That is correct. That is correct.
We're switching that alliance.
We're watching a switcheroo happen right now. Everybody in the current status right now is the South China Sea. The Chinese, the communist Chinese overthrew the nationalists in 1949, the end of the Chinese Civil War. It was put on hold during the Japanese occupation from 37 to 45. The Civil War resumed in 1945 at the end of World War II. It really started up in 46. It got real bad and ended in 49. The nationalists went to Formosa. That's the name of the island, which is now Taiwan.
Right.
And we all know about the South China Sea. That's another area that is it's a tinderbox waiting to explode. China wants to control the South China Sea for mineral rights, trading rights. It goes down to get to the South China Sea. You got to go through the Straits of Malacca. That's over there between Malaya and Western Indonesia, I believe. And that is other than the Suez, besides the Suez Canal and besides the Panama Canal, the Straits of Malacca is one of the most heavily used shipping lanes in the world. Whoever controls the Straits of Malacca is going to control probably 3/4 of the trade in the world coming out of Asia.
That is actually where India may have the upper hand.
That's correct.
Stance against China is they could choke the Chinese trade off there, and they also got another little island chain back behind it. So India has basically a two-stand capability there to hold off the Chinese.
Right.
Those narrow choke points. So even if the Chinese had a bigger navy, India will still have the upper hand. It's
right.
got like 300 Greeks holding off Xerxes' armies, right?
That is correct. Thermopylae. So we see what's going on in Afghanistan now. For 20 years, the United States has been there. We kicked out Osama. We found Osama bin Laden, took him out in 2011.
Yeah,
And we've been trying the nation build in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, again, is tribal. They do not think like we do. Iraq was more stable. You had a strong government under Saddam Hussein, for better or for worse. He was a totalitarian. He was a socialist, but they had a government nonetheless. But he had to be strong to keep the artificial country of Iraq together. Again, 60, 30, 10. 60% Shia, 30% Sunni.
Saddam was on the minority side ruling.
He was Sunni. Saddam Hussein is Sunni. Western Iraq is Sunni. Southern and Eastern Iraq is Shia. Yeah. They're aligned with Iran. That's why we had such a hard time in Baghdad and central Iraq, the Sunni triangle. Well, not the Sunni triangle, but in Baghdad and whatnot during the Iraq war between 2003 and 2011. A lot of areas they call it the Iraq Civil War, because really after the United States overthrew Saddam, you had a period of relative peace, so to speak. But by 2005, it erupted in pretty much a civil war between Sunnis and Shias. The Kurds, who were left out of the Treaty of Versailles and having their own country, they pretty much have an autonomous region now. I mean, they call it Kurdistan, but it's not recognized as a country. The Peshmerga have done a very good job in keeping that area safe. They fought against ISIS. The United States, we helped them out up there as well. They did join forces with the Iraqi army. It took a lot of diplomatic maneuvering to keep that going. And, then you got Turkey. Turkey does not like the Kurds. They don't want a Kurdistan. Iran does not really want a Kurdistan either. And of course, Iraq does not, because guess where the oil in Iraq is located? Kurdistan. So you got Erbil, those countries.
Syria, so Kurdistan is spread across a lot of countries.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So ISIS comes to pass. They were so ruthless that they were part of AQI, Al-Qaeda Iraq. That's where their nucleus, that's where they kind of were born out of. And then after the United States left, they started, hey, we're going to have a caliphate. We're going to do this, al-Baghdadi. Again, I don't remember the first part of his name. He just goes by al-Baghdadi, but that's because he's from Baghdad. He was in U.S. custody in 2010 or so. We turned him over to the Iraqis when we started to pull out. So now you have this vacuum in Afghanistan. The United States is starting to pull out. We see the mess that's going on over there. All these terrorists it's all in the open news. You can read about it. The Taliban, they took over in 1996 after they overthrew and hung Najibullah, who was the communist installed Afghan president after the Russians left in 1989, February of 89. And the Taliban were just they're fundamentalist Islamic, kind of like what Al-Qaeda is kind of. They're just real fundamentalist Islam. Let me take that back. ISIS, they're more like ISIS. So that's why you're starting to hear about ISIS rising up again. Here it is. We defeated ISIS completely, pretty much by 2018, 2017 timeframe. You had the war, the Syrian civil war going on. You had that. The Libyan uprising in 2011, they overthrew Gaddafi. All these little groups, they all feed off each other. So now
we have to enable that. A lot of our color revolutions did the same. Gaddafi had actually given up his nuclear program.
That is correct.
It looked like he was trying to do good things. He was trying to develop his country, but
it is well known, open sources. Gaddafi's nuclear weapons program is stored in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Wow.
It's an open source. That was the thing. You had Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons. He used them on his own people, the Marsh Arabs. He used them on, no, take that back. He did not use them on the Marsh Arabs. He used it on the Kurds in northern Iraq. The Marsh Arab uprising after the Desert Storm of 1991 really set back. That was another diplomatic blunder that the United States did. And General Schwarzkopf, in his autobiography, he talks about that. He said one of the things he regrets was allowing the Iraqis to be able to fly helicopters. So guess what the Iraqis used to exterminate the Marsh Arabs, who rose up against them. And we encouraged them to rise up, but did we do anything? No. So now let's just go to modern day Afghanistan, what's going on now on the ground there. Taliban set and wait. They set and wait. The Taliban basically set and wait. I mean, it's hit and run tactics. It's like whack-a-mole. It's the same thing that the problems we were having in Iraq between 2003 and 2011.
Well, they had a perfect country to hide in northern Texas.
Exactly. It's very rugged, very high altitude.
There, waited us out.
They just wait us out. And that's pretty much what they did. You know, like they say, Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. What is the ramifications of what's going on now? Is Pax Americana on the decline? That's for the historians to figure out. I have my thoughts and ideas. It's going to be interesting to see. The Red Dragon is rising. It's in the news, open source. They're talking with the Chinese are talking with the Taliban. Supposedly there are billions of dollars worth of minerals, rare earth elements as well located in Afghanistan.
Up to 3 trillion.
You know, I don't know how much it's well over in the billions, trillions. You know, I can't count that high. It's just there. Whoever controls that, a lot of our computers, modern technology relies on rare earth elements. Whoever has that is going to control things. In the 20th century, it was oil. In the 19th century and on back, it was gold. You also had the spices and everything, the spice trade. So you see what's happening. We've gone, you know, how technology evolves, how things get quote unquote more modern and everything. You know, it's leading up, you know, to that. So hence why you now have a big push for the rare earth elements. You've heard electric cars, rare earth elements.
Computers, cell phones,
everything that we use. You go to Walmart today, where is the stuff made? 91% of the items made in Walmart are made in China. 30 years ago, you still had Sam Walton, you know, hey, you know, Sam's Choice made in America. You could buy his brand, Sam's Choice made in America. You don't see that no more at Walmart. 1996, during the campaign of 1996, Al Gore met with the Buddhists in a Buddhist temple in Los Angeles and cut a deal with the Chinese and campaign cash for technology. Prior to that era, the Chinese could not put rockets in orbit. Chinese have had astronauts in orbit. 25 years later? It's amazing. In the grand scheme of things throughout the world, 25 years is a blink in the eye. 245 years is a blink in the eye. When you have a country like China that's been around since 2500 AD, roughly 4,000 years of history, they think they're the big man on the block, and they are now rising. You know, during the 19th and 20th centuries, China was a mess. You had Western traders over there. You had colonies. You know, you had Macau. You had Hong Kong. So Macau was Portuguese, and Hong Kong was British up to 1997. That is the date they say the British Empire, the sun set, was 1997 when Hong Kong went away. It was given back to communist China. In 1900 in Peking, you had the Boxer Rebellion. You had countries that 14 years later were fighting each other through a 4-year-long war, were actually rushed in to go stop the Boxer Rebellion, and that was over opium. The Boxers, it was over the opium trade. So China was pretty much ripped apart by the West, and then later by the Japanese. So you see how the Chinese, they have a long memory. They remember what went on. They're not going to forget. And so it is going to be extremely interesting to see how all these outcomes, what's going on today, what is going to be the outcome. It's going to be interesting. The question lies, is Pax Americana alive or dead? Is it on the decline? Secondly, is the United States going to exist in 50 to 100 years? Democracies, on average, throughout world history, last roughly 300 years. The Romans, through the Roman Republic, the Greeks, the city-states, other parts, other democracies that's been out there, on average, 300 years. It is going to be interesting to see. Look at our trade with NAFTA, 1994. That was marked the downturn that started in World War II with American industrialism. It was pretty much given away at NAFTA in 1994. Travel through Central and South Alabama. Find me the textile industry. It does not exist. It's been replaced by the automobile industry. And where does that automobile industry come from? Germany, Mercedes-Benz in the Tuscaloosa area. Lincoln, Alabama has the Honda. Up here in Huntsville, Toyota Mazda, Japanese. Montgomery and West Point, Georgia is Hyundai and Kia. That's Korean. And over 150 auto parts shops located, parts suppliers that build the components to assemble those cars in Montgomery, West Point, up here in the Huntsville, Madison area, and also in Lincoln, Alabama, and Tuscaloosa. Of course, Tuscaloosa is Mercedes-Benz, Germany. The reason why these companies came to Alabama in the past 27 years, you didn't have this 27 years ago. 27 years later, look at it. Why? Cheap labor. Cheap labor. Alabama is rated 52nd in education. 52nd in education. What is the big push in the Alabama schools? Career tech education. Why? They need people to work the assembly lines.
Factories, yeah.
But guess what's going to happen between 2030 and 2040? Artificial intelligence and robots. Do you think they need people to work the assembly lines? Nope. Do you think Alabamians are going? Who do you think runs the factories and the plants in Alabama? Is it Alabamians?
Foreigners.
It's Koreans, Germans, Japanese. They come over from Japan. Amazing. In 2007, when I was in Korea.
The Toyota plant's not that far from me, and I see Japanese around this area.
Not far from me. That's right. While I was in Korea, I ran into a Korean army officer at an E-Mart. E-Mart is like a Korean Walmart. And he spoke fluent English. He had an Auburn hat. And I said, "Oh, War Eagle." He goes, "Oh, War Eagle," like that. Yeah, I got my electrical master's degree in electrical engineering at Auburn. My son was born while I was there. "Oh, your son was born at East Alabama Medical Center in Opelika." He goes, "Wow, you do know the area." I said, "Yeah, I went to school there." And we talked and met later, had dinner and all that kind of stuff like that. But do you see the danger? Are we going to have countries, or are we going to be global? It's globalism. That is what is rising right now. So who is going to be in charge of this? Is it going to be the UN? Is it going to be the United States? Or could it be something like China?
Well, I mean, they're competing for that right now. China wants it, but then again, there's kind of a conglomeration of techno elites that are also trying to set up something of their own in that area, I think. So
correct.
Outside of government. So you got a kind of a quasi-corporate structure, and then you got the communist China that seem to be competing for this, but they may be kind of hand in glove.
Right. It's interesting. You look at Apple, Google,
they are. Yeah, they're Apple,
Amazon, China. Nike. They're all made. You buy a new iPhone or an iPad. Where does it say? Designed, Apple, designed in California, made in China. It's not made in the United States. Where are the rare earth minerals, elements, all the other things that they need? It's located over there. So it's made over there. What kind of labor do they use? We've heard all the stories and all. It's well known, well documented in Western China. You have the Uyghurs. You have all these cities that sprung up, and all they do is work. Same way with the automobile industry in Central and South Alabama. I've talked with several employees when I was down there. I'd talk to them in passing. Tell me about what you do. They work 6-7 day work weeks, and they go work 2 or 3 weeks day shift. Then they go to evening shift. Then they go to graveyard shift, and then they rotate back. It's just back and forth. Well, where is the weekends? We don't have it. We have to make cars. We have to make trucks. We have to do this. How are you getting paid? You look up the pay scales, anywhere from $12, $15 up to $24 an hour. We get time and a half. We get all this overtime and everything like that. But you're not at home with your family. There is an article that I've read. It was published in 2017. It's called Alabama's Automobile Industry, Broken Dreams, Crushed Limbs. I think that's what it's called. It was done in, I think it was Bloomberg. Look it up on the internet. It talks about the Alabama automobile industry and what happens to the workers. I did know a company that I was associated with in Southeast Alabama. The girl that was killed by the welding rods of a robot that malfunctioned at the Angian plant outside Opelika on I-85. She died the next day. She was impaled. That was one of their temp workers. A lot of these companies that come in, they're not hiring people as a full regular employee. You're not hired. You don't work for Toyota. You work for a temporary employer. Alabama is a right to work state. There are no unions. That can be good. That can be bad.
That's why all this manufacturing work is coming here.
That's correct. And it's not just in Alabama. It's also in Georgia, South Carolina. South Carolina is another automobile industry. You got BMW. You've got Mercedes-Benz up there as well, I believe. In Georgia, I've already mentioned Honda, the Kia plant there in West Point. Chevrolet or GM used to have a plant in, I think it was them. It might have been Ford, but I believe it was GM in the Atlanta area, up near Spaghetti Junction. Closed. It's been, it's replaced. So what is interesting is since NAFTA in 1994, we have seen a massive change in the economies of the world. The United States used to be a hub of manufacturing, not anymore. Detroit is another good example.
Oh yeah.
It's just rotted from within. It's been on the decline for over 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
There are parts of Alabama, if you buy, for example, in the Montgomery area, in a lot of these areas that are dying out, these metro areas, there's, Montgomery, in parts of Montgomery, you buy a house, within a year, you're going to lose equity, $10,000 in some cases. Our rural areas are dissolving. I was reading some articles this week about the schools in Alabama. They're having a massive teacher shortage. But you look at Madison, you'll have here in Madison City Schools, you'll have maybe 150 people apply for a couple positions at an elementary school or a high school or middle school. But you go to Central and South Alabama in these areas that are dying in the Black Belt and in the Wiregrass, they might be lucky to have 2 or 3 to apply for a job. They shut down a school system, shut down their 7th grade because they ran out of substitute teachers. If you go to al.com, you can read about it. So the thing is, if you look at what they're teaching in high school, not all education is equal. The Madison City Schools were rated #1 in Alabama, according to U.S. News and World Report, as of last October. The housing prices, the equity here in Madison, houses went up overnight, tens of thousands of dollars. But you go to Central and South Alabama and some of the rural areas, you're going to be able to buy more house and more land much cheaper. But how are you going to maintain it when you're working for $12, $15 an hour at a job? You can't. You better be retired and have a lot. So, life is cheap in Alabama. The quality of life is cheap. Property is cheap. But again, look at the quality of life. So yes, Alabama has been affected by the global economy. People are leaving, and this is nationwide. They're leaving the rural areas and going to the cities and suburbs is where they're going. You see these maps, blue states, red states. That might have been true 20 years ago in the election in 2000. Now look at it today. What is happening? The rural areas are shrinking. People are going to either the coast or they're going to where suburbia, they got to go where the jobs are. And yes, you have blue state people fleeing blue states to go to red states. Do they bring their ideas with them?
Oh, yeah.
The world is becoming more and more global. Majority of the world lives on the coast. They don't live in flyover country They don't live in hinterlands. The need for agriculture is being, for people to work the fields has been reduced by mechanized and industrial farming. Go to the Black Belt of Alabama and you will see that people are leaving. You got to go where the job is so you can feed your family. So we are seeing that here in the United States. It is going to be interesting to see the future of my kids and other people's kids is going to be very different than what we had growing up. It's going to be very different.
All right.
But as far as Afghanistan, it's interesting to see what's playing out. I never, in some cases, some of the things that's going on, I never believed I would see something like that. Many people have compared what's going on in Afghanistan to Saigon 1975. Saigon 75 we knew what was going to happen a month in advance. We admitted to it. The Watergate scandal wrecked the Nixon administration. There went all the plans. There went all the treaties. Hey, we're pulling out. We're done. We're pulling out. At the same time, I believe we had to appease Red China and pull out. Again, we were getting friendly with China. Here we are 46 years later. 46 years later. So why is this happening in Afghanistan? Interesting to see how things are playing out.
Well, I'm worried about the short-term prospects for terrorism and a lot of things like that may visit us, that we may have some other long-term ramifications out of this. So I think, we did this in a bad way. We should have pulled our people out, then pulled the army out. We should start pulling the people out a lot earlier.
Right. In the United, during Vietnam, obviously Vietnamization was complete by 1973. We had pulled out, and it was up to the South Vietnamese. What they lacked was air power. And the North Vietnamese were amazed that we did not come to. They were shocked at how fast South Vietnam felt. They thought we would come to their aid. They didn't. This is in several interviews with North Vietnamese generals. Vietnam, the 10,000 Day War, narrated by Richard Basehart, that came out in 1980. You'll hear some of the North Vietnamese generals. They were just shocked. You guys had us beat. 1968, the Tet Offensive. The United States won that. U.S. and South Vietnam won that. But if you listen to Walter Cronkite, you listen to the American media, you thought something else happened. And it was not necessarily true. It was a propaganda coup, the media was involved with that for whatever reason. Look what's happened in Afghanistan. But you are absolutely right. Why do you just say, hey, we're going to pull out and leave all this stuff? It's interesting to see how reversed it is. And knowing that it's a terrorism thing, the Taliban, the Afghans, all the old world, they've been there for millennia. The United States hasn't been there long, 20 years. That's a blink of the eye. That's a blink of an eye. That's not even a generation is considered 30 years. That's not even a whole generation yet. So interesting. The why has yet to be revealed, I think.
Well, so you think there's something else behind this? There's another bigger why. All right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see if we find out what that is, John.
There is always something behind the curtain. Yeah. Things just don't happen. Pearl Harbor just didn't happen.
Oh, yeah.
So
we've seen a lot of that. So we'll see it in time. But in the meantime, we got a lot of ramifications. The biggest thing I'm worried about most immediately is people getting left behind there and what might happen to them. I mean,
right. It's
a ram of people.
It is scary. Watch September 11th. September 11th. That is a key date in the Islamic world and throughout history.
Will they be able to pull anything off that fast, given that they just now seized or are seizing Afghanistan? Would they be ready within just a few weeks to pull off some other major intricate operation? I don't know. That's
to be determined.
Yeah.
Nobody was tracking what happened on 9/11 20 years ago. Nobody. In Great Britain, you had 7/11 in 2005, July 11th. For some reason, the number 11 is very big with the in the Islamic world. That you had the sack of Vienna that went on in September of I can't remember exactly what it was. Just let's look up the sack of Vienna on Wikipedia or on the internet. But you had that. You had some other events that's happened in September. But September 11th always seems to be a date that comes around. Would it be this year? I don't know. I mean, we look at dates as well. Pearl Harbor, JFK assassination. Now, then we had 9/11. It seems like every 20 years, some big calamity happens. That's been in recent history in the U.S.
Over 20 years?
It seems like every 20 years. Yeah. My mother.
Having a lot of hostages in Afghanistan would be a big calamity in my book.
I agree.
I think that would be a huge calamity. I mean, how many people did we lose in 9/11? Well, you know what?
We lost over 3,000, and 99% of those, greater than 90%, were civilians.
How many people may be left behind in Afghanistan?
I've heard thousands.
Yeah, so
that's open source media. In comparison, 9/11, compare that to Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 41, or greater than 90% were military, but it's roughly 2,400 people. 9/11 had a greater loss of life at three different locations. One, the primary location being in New York City with the Twin Towers. And just to remind the audience, the targets on 9/11 was one, New York. That is your economic and media center of the United States. Number two, Washington, D.C. Target one was the Pentagon, the defense, the military. Target number two, they think, was either going to be the U.S. Capitol or the White House. That's your government. That was Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania, that was overtaken by the passengers. Their target was that plane was either going to be the Capitol building or the White House. That was a speculation. The other two targets were taken out, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. So things do not happen just to happen. There's always a task and purpose for everything. So it is going to be interesting to see what is going on. That it is known in open source media. The Taliban are already talking with the communist Chinese and vice versa. They're already talking. Lord only knows who else is talking.
So what do you think might be the chances that the Chinese might use the Taliban operations, a proxy operation to kick dust up, give them cover to hit Taiwan? Maybe in conjunction with taking down our power grid.
In my personal view, in my personal analysis, I think it's a great possibility. How much, I don't know, but I think it's a great possibility. I thought 9/11 was going to be a ruse for Saddam Hussein to reinvade Kuwait at the same time for the PLO under Yasser Arafat, who died in 2004. To uprise against Israel. I thought the Chinese might go after Taiwan. I mean, and possibly North Korea invade Korea. I mean, what better time to do it? We have to watch what is going on worldwide today, because there are some things going on out there. People talk. I mean, look at the allies now. It's in the news. Prime Minister Tony Blair spoke. He said, this is a travesty. Nigel Farage, who led the Brexit in Great Britain in the late 2010s, between 2015 and 2020, he came out and spoke, how are we going to be able to trust the U.S.? People got to remember Afghanistan. We went into Afghanistan. We did not go in alone. This was a NATO operation.
We just lost allies. We lost severe standing.
We did.
Trust America.
I hate to say it, but we have. It's in the news. I mean, nothing's secret about this.
Yeah,
you got other countries. Look at Taiwan. Think about Taiwan. What do you think they're thinking now? Are they going to?
China just outright tell them, hey, you can't trust America.
Yeah, and here's the proof. Here's the proof of the pudding. And
shaking in fear. They said you should be shaken in fear. You can't trust America.
Yeah. You look what's going on with the drug trade. Afghanistan, it was well known. Afghanistan is a source of opium. A lot of poppies grow there. We've seen the pictures. It's well known and well documented. Look what's happened to the United States in the past since OxyContin was developed in 1996. It came out on the market in 1996. Look at the drug trade, the illegal drug trade, the illegal trade of prescription medications and stuff. Look at Appalachia. Look at Alabama. Look at the South. Look at Ohio, the Rust Belt. These areas where the
they're devastating.
jobs went away. It seems like jobs went away. What do? People get hooked on stuff. The drug trade, yes, Alabama is heavily dependent on the agriculture and the poultry industry. That brings in people from Mexico and migrant workers and whatnot. And guess what comes with it? You've got mules. Some of those are bringing in. I got a friend of mine's a police officer in Northwest Alabama, and he's been telling me, hey, the drugs just flow. And Alabama is a rural state. You have major interstates that run north-south, I-65 and then I-20/I-2059. They come out of Atlanta and go west, go from Mobile and go north. It's like I-95 from Maine all the way up to down to Miami. The drugs are flowing. They're coming in, and Alabama is a rural state, and people can hide out. They can do stuff. So you see how things are interconnected. Where does most of the opium come from? Well, you got Mexican brown, you got China white. It's pretty obvious where that stuff's coming from. Fentanyl, they estimate that the vast majority of the fentanyl coming into the United States is coming from China. We have been, and then you also got to look at the cyber warfare that's been going on. Everybody,
China's probably laughing at us for being on drugs, because that's how Britain kept China subdued, was with opium, and that's why
that's the Boxer Rebellion.
Great Britain wanted to keep the opium on China. China tried to shake it off.
That is correct. That's what
Great Britain kept China drugged, they could run China.
That is the Boxer Rebellion. That's what sparked the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, or one of the things, the Opium Wars.
China
Part of that.
was trying to shake that off, and eventually Mao got rid of the druggies. He
did.
That's
and he also did the Cultural Revolution of 1966. That can be compared to CRT, critical race theory, that we're seeing today.
So a lot of American youth are looking up to communism as a salvation. Well, they will happily use these youth to put that system in power, and then they will summarily get rid of the people that put them in power.
Yes,
that's what a lot of these dictators do. Even Hitler, he decimated the people that first put him in power, because they were considered misfits. They were great.
That's the brown shirts, the SA, what they call the.
They were great for getting them put in power, but once they get in power, they weren't great for maintaining the order, because they weren't people that follow order.
Right. One of the
power and the people that will follow you are two different types, and that's what these dictators have typically done. Is they've used one group to set them in power, then they would get rid of them. They would.
That's correct. Yeah, just to touch on what you stated, in 1934. Adolf Hitler is Chancellor of Germany. He's not Führer yet. You still have President Otto von Hindenburg. He was on his deathbed. He was sick, and Hindenburg was a hero to the German people when he served the Kaiser Wilhelm II. So he's looked up on, and hence why he's voted president. But he was in his 80s, and Hitler went to Hindenburg and said, "What do I need to do to gain the power of the military, this and another?" And Hindenburg told Hitler, "You've got to get rid of your brown shirts." That's the SA. And so that was the Night of Long Knives, 30 June 1934. Ernst Röhm was the head of the SA. He was found, he was a homosexual. He was found in bed with another one. That was looked down upon, but that's a fact, whether you believe in that stuff or not. And he was summarily executed along with the other SA leaders. The brown shirts were swept away. Paul von Hindenburg died later that year, and then Hitler was now the Führer of Germany, and the rest is history. So, but yes, it's the communists have a term for that. It's called useful idiots. Useful idiots. The useful idiots, the Bolsheviks coined that term. Hey, they're useful, and then when they're done, we can sweep them away. When Castro took over Cuba in 1959, same thing with Russia in 1917, 1920. China was the same way.
It's a modus operandi. It's happened in nation
every time. Every time. What they do, they get rid of the educated people, they get rid of the professional people, which includes not limited to lawyers, doctors, nurses, the military, retired military, former military, whatever, officers and whatnot. They liquidate them. We all know what the term liquidation means. What do you have left? You have the masses.
Look what he did. He got rid of what percentage of his country?
Say again.
What percentage of this did Pol Pot get rid of?
Millions. It's the killing fields. We may never know.
A third of his own people.
Third, yeah. They either went to the concentration camps in Cambodia. If you didn't conform, you were exterminated. The Vietnamese pretty much did the same thing after they took South Vietnam. Everybody went to re-education camps. Cuba was the same way. Soviet Union, you had the gulags. And of course in Nazi Germany, which is National Socialism, which is center left, they sent people to concentration camps. But just as a reminder, socialism, the Nazis were socialists, the communists were socialists as well, which is left to center. What is that?
Right. Nazis and communists are both socialists.
That National Socialist Party. I mean, I think it's NDSAP or something like that. That's in German, but when you do the acronym in English, it's Nazi. Mo Brooks mentioned this Saturday night at the Trump rally. Because his father fought against the Nazis in World War II in Germany. He actually spelled out the entire name, and he said, and y'all know that is Nazi. The National Socialists, you still have companies that own they own the factories, they hire the workers and whatever, but they're told what to make by the central government. They don't make the decision, the central government does. Whereas communism, the central government owns the factories. So Soviet Union, you have factory number one, factory number two. China's the same way. But you go to Germany, you still had Messerschmitt, you still had Bayer, you still had Hugo Boss, you still had Mercedes-Benz, BMW, whatnot. Volkswagen was first revealed in 1938, the people's car, Volkswagen, people's car.
People's car.
The Beetle, the Volkswagen Beetle, the love bug. That's where that came from. It was going to be a small car for everybody. Volkswagen, people's car. It's only the well-to-do had cars back then, and so they're left wing. Of course, capitalism is right wing. It's more democracy. Hey, you sink or swim based on how well you do. So that's the difference between the two. And the United States is supposed to be capitalist. The West is supposed to be capitalist for the most part, whereas Russia, their capitalism. China is communist, but they are a hybrid of capitalism and communism. I dare say it's kind of like Nazism.
That's what I would say. It looks a lot like
Nazism. It's center left is what it is, but there's still a totalitarian regime.
It looks more like Nazism than anything else
Yes. When you look at the economic systems, that's where they've moved from the far left communism have gone to the center left. But they did that starting in the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s. They did that in order to compete with the US. They had to do that.
Military.
Yep.
Enable and build a military. Well, look, we got to go. I got a couple of things I got to do, and I'll do a live session later tonight. I got something I got to look after. So we need to depart here. You got anything you'd like to say in a final message here?
The more we ignore history, we're doomed to repeat it. We've got to teach history in our schools. We've got to teach geography in our schools. We've got to teach civics in our schools. 95%, I was told this in a discussion with two individuals, and it's a composite of the two. One, a student, an undergrad, the other, the dean of education at Troy University a couple of years ago. And I'd made mention about possibly being a history teacher, something like that. And it was brought to my attention that, okay, that's fine. What sport are you going to coach? What sport are you going to coach? The student mentioned first day of history class, professor goes, show of hands. How many of y'all's history teacher first name was Coach? 95% of the hands went up. We have got to have dedicated history, geography, and civics in our schools.
It's the same way with science and math. We had so many
science and math, everything. You can't have coaches moonlighting. You've got to have dedicated. And I'm so happy that my daughter at her school, I have met her history teachers. They're real history teachers, like I had when I was in school. You know, we have got to study that. And if you don't, you're going to have to do self-study. You've got to think not everything is what's on the surface might be one thing, but it's like an iceberg. You only see a little bit below the surface. Under the surface, it can be gigantic and enormous. So I take those. I apologize for being long-winded. I hope I didn't bounce around too much, but I hope that my one of the world of how things are going on, how that leads to today. The things that happened in our past do resonate today. They do resonate today. And that was basically the overarching theme of my discussion of the Middle East and of Europe and the world. Everything is interconnected, and it goes back millennia.
Yep. Well, very good. So we're going to terminate the video for a moment, and I want you to hang on just for 1 minute.
Thank you. My pleasure.
To all you watching, I just want to say thank you very much for watching. Hope you got something out of this. Remember that if we don't learn history, we're doomed to repeat it. So let's carry that forward. Thank you for watching.